George Harrison appears unannounced at studio. John's confession left the band in shock. The London fog, a spectral shroud, clung to the cobbled streets, swallowing the city's usual clamor. It was a night for secrets, for shadows to dance where light once reigned. Inside the hallowed walls of Abbey Road, Studio 2 hummed with a different kind of tension. Not the vibrant energy of creation, but the brittle silence of a fractured dream. John Lennon, a silhouette against the muted glow of the mixing board, stared at the tape reels, each revolution a ghost of melodies past, a whisper of what was and what might never be again. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, forgotten ambition, and the lingering phantom of harmony. He was alone, or so he thought. The city outside slept, but John's mind was a maelstrom. The weight of the world, the expectations, the echoes of 1,000 screaming fans pressed down on him. He clutched a half-empty glass, the ice long melted, mirroring the coldness that had seeped into his soul. The studio, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb, preserving the relics of a golden age that had tarnished beyond recognition. He heard the faint creak of the studio door, a sound that should have been impossible. His head snapped up, eyes narrowed, piercing the gloom. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in the same quiet mystery as the night itself. It was George, unannounced, uninvited, a specter from a past John had tried and failed to bury. The silence deepened, charged with unspoken words, with years of resentment and a fragile, desperate hope. The stage was set for a revelation, a truth long hidden, waiting to tear through the fabric of their carefully constructed realities. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you are still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. George Harrison stood there, a quiet storm in human form. His presence was a stark contrast to the studio's sterile order, a wild, untamed energy that had always simmered beneath his calm exterior. He wore a worn leather jacket, the collar turned up against the chill that seemed to follow him even indoors. His eyes, usually alight with a gentle knowing spark, were now shadowed, reflecting the weary wisdom of a man who had seen too much, felt too deeply. He didn't speak, merely observed John, a silent challenge in his gaze. John, caught off guard, felt a tremor of something he hadn't experienced in years: vulnerability. He had built walls, brick by brick, around his heart, fortifying himself against the world, against his past. But George, with his quiet intensity, had always possessed the uncanny ability to see through them. He was the conscience, the spiritual anchor, the one who had always sought a deeper truth amidst the chaos of their fame. John remembered George's small, cramped flat in Esher, the scent of incense and the quiet strumming of a sitar, a world away from the screaming crowds and flashing lights. He remembered the shared dreams, the youthful exuberance, the unspoken pact that had bound them together. Now, that pact felt like a distant echo, a broken melody. George's arrival wasn't just a visit, it was an intrusion, a mirror held up to John's own fractured reflection. The studio lights seemed to flicker, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around them, each one a memory, a regret, a question waiting to be answered. The air crackled with the weight of unspoken words, years of them. George finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Still chasing ghosts, John? It wasn't a question, but an observation, laced with a familiar, weary affection. John flinched, the barb hitting its mark. He took a long swig from his glass, the liquid burning a path down his throat, but doing little to quell the fire in his gut. "What do you want, George?" he retorted, his voice rough, defensive. "Come to gloat? To remind me of what we lost?" George stepped further into the light, his face etched with a complex mix of sadness and resolve. "I came because I heard the whispers, the new songs. They sound hollow, John, like a scream trapped in a cage." John slammed his glass down, the sound echoing sharply in the quiet studio. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you know what it's like to carry this burden?" He gestured wildly around the studio, at the instruments, the microphones, the very air that seemed to vibrate with their shared history. "Every note I play, every word I sing, it's measured against the past, against us." George walked slowly, deliberately, to the piano, running a hand over the keys. "The burden was always there, John, for all of us, but you always carried it differently, like a crown you never asked for, but refused to take off." He turned, his gaze unwavering. "But this isn't about the past, not entirely. It's about the present and the future. What are you doing here, alone, in the dark, when the world expects you to shine?" John looked away, his jaw tight. The truth, raw and ugly, clawed at his throat. He had been trying to write, to create, to find that spark again. But every melody felt borrowed, every lyric a lie. The wellspring had run dry, replaced by a bitter, stagnant pool. He was trapped not by external forces, but by his own internal prison. And George, with his quiet wisdom, had seen it all. The secret was out, not in words, but in the palpable despair that clung to John like a second skin. The confession hung in the air, unspoken yet understood. John, cornered by George's unwavering gaze, felt the carefully constructed facade of his self-sufficiency begin to crack. He paced the studio floor, a caged animal, the rhythm of his steps a frantic counterpoint to the quiet hum of the equipment. "You don't understand, George," he muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "It's not just the music. It's everything. The expectations, the constant scrutiny. Every move I make, every word I utter is dissected, analyzed, judged." He stopped, turning to face George, his eyes wild with a desperate intensity. They want the old John, the angry John, the revolutionary John. But that John, he's gone. Or maybe he never truly existed, just a caricature they painted. He'd picked up a guitar, strumming a discordant chord, the sound jarring in the stillness. "I try to write, but it's like pulling teeth. The words don't come. The melodies feel forced. It's all just noise." He threw the guitar back onto its stand with a clatter. George listened, his expression unreadable, a silent anchor in John's storm. He remembered his own struggles, the years of feeling overshadowed, his own songs dismissed. He understood the suffocating weight of a legacy, the pressure to constantly reinvent, to always be more. "The world doesn't want a caricature, John," George finally said, his voice soft but firm. "It wants truth. And sometimes the truth is messy. It's ugly. It's not always a revolution. Sometimes it's just a whisper of pain." He walked over to John, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've always been honest, John, even when it hurt. What's stopping you now?" The question hung heavy, a challenge and an invitation. John looked at George, truly looked at him, and saw not judgment, but a profound, weary understanding. The tension in the room, though still present, shifted, becoming less about conflict and more about a shared, unspoken burden. The ghosts of their past, for a fleeting moment, seemed to recede, replaced by the stark reality of two men grappling with the echoes of a life lived in the blinding glare of the public eye. The studio lights, once a beacon of inspiration, now felt like an interrogation lamp, highlighting every flaw, every tremor in John's resolve. George's question, simple yet profound, had pierced through the layers of cynicism and defiance John had meticulously built. "What's stopping you now?" The words echoed, a relentless drumbeat in his mind. He sank onto a worn leather couch, burying his face in his hands. The silence that followed was crushing, heavier than any argument, more revealing than any shouted accusation. It was the silence of a man facing his deepest fear, his ultimate failure. He lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed, not from tears, but from exhaustion, from the relentless battle within. "I'm scared, George," he confessed, the words barely a whisper, raw and stripped of all pretense. "Scared that there's nothing left, that the well is dry, that I've said everything I had to say, and now I'm just an empty vessel." He looked around the studio, at the instruments that had once been extensions of his soul, now silent witnesses to his despair. "Every time I pick up a guitar, every time I sit at the piano, I hear them. The voices, the critics, the fans, comparing, demanding, and I freeze." This was the climax, the darkest moment. The king of rock and roll, the voice of a generation, reduced to a trembling admission of fear. George sat beside him, not offering platitudes, but simply being present. He understood the terror of creative barrenness, the existential dread of losing the very essence of one's being. He knew the pressure of living up to a myth, of being trapped by a past that refused to let go. John's confession wasn't just about music. It was about identity, about purpose, about the very meaning of his existence. The studio, once a place of vibrant life, now felt like a confessional, holding the weight of a soul laid bare. The air was thick with the unspoken truth. John Lennon, the icon, was lost. And in that moment of profound vulnerability, the true cost of his extraordinary life was laid bare for George to witness. The admission hung in the air, a fragile, trembling thing. "I'm scared, George." Those words, stripped of all bravado, were a key, unlocking a door John had kept bolted for years. George, ever the quiet observer, the spiritual seeker, knew that true healing began not with answers, but with acceptance. He didn't offer advice, didn't preach. Instead, he simply listened, his presence a steady, grounding force in John's turbulent world. Slowly, haltingly, John began to speak, not about music, but about the deeper currents that had pulled him under. He spoke of the relentless pursuit of fame, the loss of privacy, the way the world had devoured their youth and spat out a distorted version of their lives. He spoke of the loneliness that came with being constantly surrounded, yet utterly isolated. He spoke of the guilt, the regret, the unresolved conflicts that festered beneath the surface of his public persona. He spoke of the constant battle to reconcile the man he was with the legend he had become. As he spoke, the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, the frantic energy slowly draining away, replaced by a weary calm. It was an unburdening, a shedding of the heavy cloak of expectation and pretense. George, with his quiet nods and empathetic gaze, created a space where John could finally be just John, not Lennon, not the Beatle, but a man grappling with the complexities of his own humanity. The studio, which had felt like a cage, began to transform, becoming a sanctuary once more. The instruments, once silent accusers, now seemed to hum with a gentle, expectant energy. John's voice, initially rough with pain, softened, finding a cadence of reflection, of quiet introspection. He wasn't just confessing, he was transforming, shedding the skin of the past, preparing for an uncertain, yet potentially liberating future. The weight of the world, though still present, no longer felt entirely his to bear alone. The first rays of dawn, pale and hesitant, began to filter through the studio windows, painting the dust motes in the air with a faint, ethereal glow. The night had passed, not in a blaze of revelation, but in the quiet, steady unfolding of truth. John, exhausted but lighter, sat beside George, the silence between them now one of understanding, not tension. The confession had been made, the burden shared. "So, what now, John?" George asked, his voice gentle, breaking the long silence. John looked at his hands, calloused from years of guitar playing, now trembling slightly. "I don't know, George. Maybe I just need to stop trying to be the John Lennon everyone expects. Maybe I just need to be me." He looked up, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not hope, not yet, but a fragile sense of possibility. "The music, it's still there, I think. Just different, quieter, more honest." George smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "The best music always is, John. It's not about the noise, it's about the resonance." He stood, stretching, the stiffness of the long night evident in his movements. "London's waking up. Time for us ghosts to disappear." He paused at the door, turning back to John. "Remember, John, the song is never truly finished. It just waits for the next verse." John watched him go, the studio door closing softly behind him, leaving him once again in the quiet solitude. But this time, the solitude felt different. It wasn't empty. It was pregnant with possibility. He walked to the piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. He didn't play a grand chord or a revolutionary anthem. Instead, he played a single, simple note, a quiet, resonant hum that vibrated through the studio. A new beginning, an unfinished melody. The city outside stirred, oblivious to the silent revolution that had just taken place within Abbey Road. John Lennon, the legend, had finally found a moment of peace, a fragile truth in the heart of the storm. But the question lingered, whispered by the echoes in the studio. What new song would he dare to sing, now that he had finally listened to his own silent scream?